It is September, my friends. I'm hanging out in the most lush, prolific September garden that I've ever had, and I want the same for you. So in today's video, we are going to give you some picks that you can still plant in September, no matter where you live, featuring myself, Jacques, and some of the epic crew. My first pick is actually in this bed right now, and not the sad tomatoes, it is not the weeds, it is in fact a bed of carrots. So the spring season was carrot season in this bed for me, and I still have a few, although they're probably a little bit old. These aren't too great, but they're such a great thing to plant as we go into fall. So September into fall, really nice way to plant them. Of course, early spring into the beginning of summer, also a great time to plant them. A lot of different varieties work here. I've got a few that I really like. If you want to mix, go with a rainbow. We've got Cosmic Purple. We have the Parisian Tonda di Parigi. These ones are kind of small, maybe gourmet if you want to fancy yourself a bit of a chef. And then if you want to get into a thicker boy, then go with the Shin Kuroda. But honestly, any variety works. The thing about carrots, we did a video on this earlier this season that really unlocked their growth for myself, for Jacques, for some other folks on the team, is you have to master the sowing of carrots. The easiest way we found to do it, if you want to go straight from the pack, is to open the top of the pack and make a V-shaped bend in it, and then do what Jacques calls the tickle. So you come through and you just, and they will slowly meter themselves out over the course of a row. Plant them in long rows, and then cover them up with a little bit of compost or a little bit of soil. Keep them nice and moist for at least 2 weeks. They need to germinate successfully. They're very delicate in that germination phase. And then you want to come through. I did 2 thinning rounds during this carrot harvest, and it worked out really well for me. Thinning meaning cutting out the carrots that are spaced too close together. So think about it this way. If this Shin Kuroda carrot grows to, let's say, a 2-inch diameter, so 2 inches across, well then I want at least an inch of space between it and the next variety, right? Because half of 2 is 1, so half of that distance across to the other side is going to be the exact amount of space that I need. So come through and thin. I really think it's the unlocker of all carrot growth. Without doing it, you just get really weird, sort of undersized carrots, forked carrots, weird looking carrots. And if you do it, you get massive carrots. I think I had at least 100 pounds of carrots out of this row right here. For me, it's the perfect crop to grow from late summer into fall, into even winter if you're in a colder climate, because you can put them under cover, and not only do they get sweeter when you harvest them, but they're very tolerant to even some snow and some light frost.
September is that time of year where your summer garden is really starting to fade. In particular, my flowers are definitely starting to fade. And when it comes to raised bed flowers, I really want something that I could plant right on the edge without taking up the primary growing space, make a little flower that hangs off, and that is what I'm looking for. And right now, the perfect flower to start at this time of year that also fills in any space you need is the viola. I have 2 different options here for you. The Corsican violet, the summer breeze. The great thing about this flower is that they only get like 6 to 8 inches tall, so something like this. Then they produce a ton of really nice sized flowers that hang a little bit off the corner. They're also really good for filling in empty little patches around your garden bed. They don't take up much space. They come in a wide variety of colors. Now there is a special consideration when starting these, so let me show you that technique right over there. One other thing I'll mention really quickly is that there is a whole world of different color options when it comes to violas. These are the ones that I chose because I think they look cool, but there's a lot of different options out there. Now when it comes to starting these seeds, they're small. They're not like crazy small like a snapdragon seed, for example. But one thing that you want to make sure you do, it's actually pretty basic, but is a little bit surprising for a small flower seed, is that this one needs darkness to germinate. So you don't want to just like cover it with a little vermiculite or barely cover it. You want to fully cover it with soil, and you want to follow the instructions. So in this case, it says about 1/8 of an inch, which isn't that much, but it is a substantial amount, enough that you could put a whole package of soil just like that, press it in nicely to make sure that seed has good contact with the soil. And just like that, we've provided darkness, moisture retention by pressing them down, and you should be off to the races to get some really beautiful violas for your fall garden.
This crop is one of the trickiest to grow. I'm pretty sure it's every gardener's nightmare, especially those of us that live in warmer climates, because it's a cool season crop, but we mostly eat it during the summer in salsas, chimichurris, alongside other summer crops. So it's really frustrating because when we need it to grow, it doesn't want to grow, and when we don't need it to grow, that's when it grows the best. But I don't care, I'll grow it any time of year because I love it so much, and that is cilantro. As I was saying before, cilantro is a cool weather crop that's very sensitive to the heat, so September is the perfect time to grow it. And we can even overwinter it here in North Carolina with just a little bit of frost protection. I like to just put a light row cover over it, and I always like to plant a slow bolting variety like this one. This is long-standing Santo, and this just kind of helps it to not bolt quite as immediately in the spring when the temperatures start to warm up. It's still definitely gonna bolt, but it just kind of prolongs it a little bit longer. If you're wanting to grow it for the seeds, summer is the perfect time to grow it. And this is what it looks like when it goes to seed. So this is a stalk of cilantro that I harvested this summer. There are little seeds on here, as you can see. And what I do to kind of keep a constant supply of cilantro in my garden, kind of get a cycle or a flow going with it, is I will plant them from seed in the fall. I'll enjoy them all fall and all winter. In the spring, I let them go to flower. I let the seeds dry out. And in the summer, right about this time, I will collect them for their seeds. And then I'll just leave some seeds on the plant, and I'll either replant these seeds or I'll just kind of leave this in the ground and let the seeds fall where they may and let it just reseed itself. But that's just a way that I keep the cycle going in my garden. To plant cilantro, you can either start in seed trays if you want, or you can do what I love to do, just scatter the seeds, rake your hands through the soil, and you can get away with planting cilantro pretty densely, but when they do go to flower, they can get pretty large. So I try to leave like 8 inches to a foot between each plant.
Fall in Florida is a crucial growing season for some of our most beloved garden crops. With the heat finally subsiding and some relatively mild weather on the horizon for the next few months, now is the time to sow some of the more temperature finicky crops that you want to get in. So that's why in the month of September, I make sure to get in a few successions of cucumber. I just can't live without cucumbers. They're an absolute staple in my kitchen, and I really enjoy growing them in my garden. And here in Florida, they are one of those crops that has to be grown in the shoulder seasons of fall and spring. They cannot handle the extremes of summer and winter. Now, germinating cukes is a breeze. I'm just going to sow those seeds 1/2 inch deep. They're going to be spaced a foot apart, and I'm gonna put about 3 seeds in each hole and thin to the strongest seedling. And I'm not gonna pull out those other 2 seedlings and disturb the roots. I'm actually just going to snip them either with a little pair of scissors or with my fingernails. You typically want to direct sow your cucumbers because they don't like any trauma to their root system. However, it is possible to start them in trays and transplant them out. You just have to be really ginger with those seedlings, and you don't want to let them go more than 3 weeks in their pot, because once those roots hit the side of the tray, they're going to stunt the growth of the overall plant. Cucumbers are fairly heavy feeders. They like rich, well-drained soil with the addition of a little organic matter or good quality compost. And they like consistent watering. I don't like to let my cucumbers dry out. They don't like soggy soil either, so make sure that soil is well draining. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. Growing cucumbers in Florida is never easy peasy. Yes, in fall and spring, they're gonna be happier temperature-wise, but you're still going to have to contend with some pretty voracious pests, specifically the pickleworm. The best way to deal with pickleworm is just to cover your plants with a floating row cover. The adult phase of a pickleworm is a moth, and that is going to lay eggs on your plants and infest your fruit. So if you keep that row cover on at night, it's going to keep the moth out and prevent egg laying. Another option, if you're really worried about pickleworm, is to grow the Mexican sour gherkin, aka the mouse melon. This is actually not a member of the Cucurbitaceae family at all, but it has the same flavor and texture as a cucumber. And what's more fun is that they're shaped like a tiny little mini watermelon. They are planted and grown exactly the same as a regular cucumber. You may put these plants a little bit closer. I like to space them about 9 inches apart, and you can sow their seeds a bit more shallow because they're smaller, so I would plant them about 1/4 inch deep. But they're also going to be grown up a trellis. They have this beautiful ivy-shaped foliage. Mouse melons are adorable. They're so much fun to grow up a teepee in a kid's garden. And the best part, pickleworms really don't like mouse melons. It's a great alternative if you're really worried about pickleworm, And they're crunchy, they're crispy, they're tasty, and really fun in kids' gardens.
In September, I am continuing to plant cool season crops just so I can make the most of the limited growing season that we have left here in Chicago. One of my absolutely favorite vegetables that I enjoy roasted or pickled are beets. And I sow a round of beets every spring and every fall. So now I'm getting ready to sow my fall round of beets. Now I prefer to direct sow beets and any other type of root vegetable. That way there's just minimal root disturbance once they are planted. Now beets are going to want full sun, and in order for the root to develop properly, you want to make sure that the soil is free from any rocks or obstacles. Now growing in all containers, the potting mix that I use is usually pretty light and fluffy, but before I sow my seeds, I will rake through the soil just to remove any maybe root balls from some summer plants that I have already pulled or anything else that might be in the soil. I'll sow the beets in my containers about a ½ inch deep, and I won't worry too much about spacing right now. I will come back in later when the plants are about 2 inches tall, and then I will thin the seedlings to 1 plant per 4 inches. And besides eating the beet root, you can actually eat the leaves as well, and they are incredibly nutrient dense.
As I'm walking through my summer garden and I see the peppers, the okra, the tomatoes, the cucumbers, I'm reminded that September is kind of the portal into that fall season, especially if you're in a milder zone like 8+. Here in San Diego, I'm 10B. You really want to start thinking about your fall and winter crops for that soon to be harvest. Now I've chosen 4 of my favorite major crops. These are the brassicas, the heavy hitters that I like to start right now to ensure that I get that winter and spring harvest. The first one's going to be Long Island improved Brussels sprouts. They take a very long time to grow. Here it says 85 to 110 days, and over the winter period, it's even longer. So if I start these now, I'll probably harvest them in sometime like February or maybe even March. So definitely get those guys started. Next up, I have the broccoli, and I've chosen Bellstart because Bellstart can tolerate quite a lot of heat. It can really handle those late September heat spells without any problems. It also produces a lot of side shoot broccoli, which is really great in the winter time where there's less sun. The plants don't have enough energy to produce like one big crown all the time, but I could get maybe a side shoot every week, and that's actually pretty nice in the winter time. Next up, I have the cabbage. I chose only 1 cabbage because cabbage can be a little tricky to start in the warm period, and red acre cabbage has been my most reliable cabbage by far. It never seems to crack, split, or get weird no matter how long I leave it in the field or what time of year it is. So red acre is great for a cabbage. And lastly, I have the cauliflower, which is Twister. This is a variety that can also handle some amount of heat, some amount of cold weather. It's really the perfect sort of shoulder season cauliflower. So between these 4, you're guaranteed to have a really good harvest, whether it comes in the winter or in the spring.
This next crop seems to always be in the news for something, some kind of contamination, whether it's E. coli, listeria, you name it. And years ago, I was like, well, guess I've got to learn how to grow it myself. And I have never looked back since then. And it's always something I tell beginner gardeners to try to grow because it's just so easy to grow. And of course, I'm talking about lettuce. There are so many different varieties of lettuce, but there's 2 main kind of types. So we have heading lettuce, which is romaine, for instance. That's just one variety of heading lettuce. But heading lettuce grows more kind of like cabbage in that it grows a main head. It's very dense, and you usually harvest the head all at once. And then we have our leafy varieties, and they grow just like the name implies, just a little more leafy, and we're usually harvesting those by leaves at a time instead of just all at once like the heading variety. I personally prefer leafy lettuce. I think it's easier to grow for beginners, and it's just more my vibe. One of my favorite varieties of lettuce is this Chef's Medley mix. I love this mix, and I love planting lettuce mixes in general because I think it's just really cool to have the different colors and the different textures. And if you plant them how I'm going to show you how to plant them, it's just like a sea of lettuce, and it's really beautiful. Personally, I really love to grow lettuce and other leafy greens in either containers or raised beds that sit pretty far up off the ground. Like this one, I call this my salad box. I always fill this with lettuce and spinach every spring and every fall. And this really helps with pest pressure, especially if you live somewhere with a slug issue like I do. Slugs are like one of my biggest issues here in North Carolina because we're in a very damp environment. And I feel like just getting the lettuce as high off the ground as possible really, really helps with slugs. If you know, you know, there's nothing worse than harvesting lettuce and it's just slimy and full of slugs. Nobody wants that. If you know me, you'll know my favorite way to plant lettuce is just by scattering seeds, taking my hand, lightly raking them through. And if you're planting a heading type of lettuce, you're gonna wanna go back and thin them out, give them a little space because they need space. They grow pretty large. With leafy lettuce, they can be planted very densely, so I don't even really have to go back and thin them out. I love to plant them densely. I love for it to look like just a sea of lettuce. And leafy lettuce specifically can be harvested early as like a baby green and it's more tender, or you can wait a little bit and harvest them when they're larger leaves.
One of the crops that I've found absolutely thrives over the fall and winter in Florida also happens to be one of the most versatile veggies out there and is an absolute favorite in my family's kitchen. So every September, I make sure to sow plenty of cauliflower seeds. Of all the different types of heading brassicas, I've found that cauliflower performs the best here in Florida. Because it's still pretty hot in September, I always make sure to start my cauliflower trays indoors in a shaded, protected location, and I'm careful not to let them dry out. I sow those seeds 1/4 inch deep in their seedling tray, and I do baby them along at the beginning because it's still quite hot for a brassica in September. And I'm gonna make sure to space my plants apart at least 2 feet. I want those leaves to be able to spread so that we can make nice, healthy heads. If you get greedy and you try to cram too many cauliflower plants in a small location, all you're gonna get is underproduction from the size of the heads. I'm gonna plant my cauliflower in part shade to full sun, and I'm gonna make sure to provide rich soil. Just like any other brassica, cauliflowers are pretty heavy feeders, so they want consistent watering, they want loose, well-drained soil, but they need some good organic matter in that soil. Addition of well-rotted compost is best. One rare variety that I love to grow is the Romanesco cauliflower. This is the one with the spirally heads, kind of in that Fibonacci sequence. They're so beautiful. You don't have to worry about blanching them because they're green-headed anyway. And for a nice, bright, traditional white cauliflower, I like the variety Snowball. It's very reliable, and of course, it's self-blanching.
I absolutely love growing radishes in my container garden for 2 main reasons. First is that they have a very short days to maturity, which means I can get multiple rounds out of them during the fall. And second, radishes typically aren't very large, but that means I can squeeze them into very small spaces in my garden. So I will basically throw radish seeds wherever I have some empty space. This might be around flowers, it might be around other vegetables, but as long as they're getting full sun and they have a little bit of room to grow, I can have radishes everywhere in my garden. So I will basically just wander through my garden, and any open spots that I see, I will toss in some radish seeds. And again, as long as it's full sun, I will put them there. I will worry about thinning them later. You do though want to keep the soil consistently moist because they are impacted by drought. That can make the root a little bit rough and decrease the quality of the flavor. So make sure to keep them consistently watered. I mean, the plants aren't going down that deep into the soil, so make sure the surface stays consistently moist. Now, radishes do come in a wide variety of sizes, types, and colors. One of my personal favorites is the watermelon radish. It does taste delicious, but I mostly grow it for how it looks because it has a really beautiful bright pink center. Snap peas are another one of my must-have cool season crops, but these rarely make it down to the kitchen because they are typically getting harvested off of the plant and going directly into my mouth because they are one of my favorite vegetables fresh off the plant. Now, growing in a small space requires a little bit of creativity. So a few years ago, I was getting ready to pull my sunflowers in order to make room for my peas. And at the same time, I was trying to figure out what I can use for a trellis. And that's when I thought, what if I use the sunflowers? So I've been doing that now for 3 years. Basically, I will take my sunflowers, tie them together to make a support, add twine as the peas grow, and that is what I use to grow my peas every fall. I will leave the sunflower stalks there through the winter and grow my spring round of peas up those same sunflower stalks. So early September, I will sow my pea seeds right in front of the sunflower stalks, about 1 to 2 inches apart. Overall, I find that peas are pretty low maintenance, but you do want to make sure they are getting regular water, especially when they are starting off as smaller plants. And of course, like most vegetables, they also want full sun.
Popeye would be all smiles with this next pick because it's the secret behind his legendary strength. And of course, I'm talking about spinach. Most of what we discussed about growing lettuce can apply to spinach as well. They're very similar, but there's just a little bit of differences between the two. One of the main differences is that spinach is a lot more cold tolerant than lettuce. Lettuce and spinach are both frost tolerant, but I find that spinach is like cold snap tolerant. Here in North Carolina, we will get some random cold snaps, and spinach is usually one of the only greens in my garden that completely overwinters. I eat on it all winter into next spring. But on the flip side, it's not as heat tolerant as lettuce. So I usually wait just a few weeks after I sow my lettuce to sow my spinach, just to make sure that we are done with the random heat waves that we get here in North Carolina as well. And since it's a little bit less heat tolerant than lettuce, I'm usually not growing spinach in the spring here. It bolts as soon as those temperatures start to warm up. So really, this is the season now for spinach, the fall and all winter long. And I really like this variety. It's called Matador. It is the closest variety I've seen that looks just like your spinach that you would get in the supermarket. The leaves are really smooth. There's another variety called Bloomsdale that I really like as well, but the leaves are a little bit more bumpy and they can be a little bit harder to clean, so I kind of like this variety just a little bit better. I typically plant spinach just like I do lettuce. I just sprinkle the seeds, rake them through with my hand. The only difference is I don't plant spinach quite as densely as lettuce because spinach grows kind of in a dense rosette shape, so it kind of grows more outward than upward, and it just requires a little bit more space, so you may have to go back and thin them out. Giving them about 6 inches in between each plant usually does the trick. And when you want to harvest spinach, I will pick individual leaves from the outside going in, and I always make sure to leave the inside leaves so that they can keep on growing.
Out here in the front yard is a bed, a naked bed, a bed in need of planting. And what better to plant it with in my climate in September than lettuce? For me, I'm excited because September is the month where I can grow lettuce again. In my climate here in San Diego, it gets pretty warm in the summer, and it makes for lettuce that wants to bolt or go to its flowering phase a little bit too quickly, and it's just more bitter than I would like. So I get excited right about now because it's time to crank out some epic greens. So there's a lot of varieties, almost too many to name, but that's actually the fun part of growing lettuce. Some of the ones I have here, got some basics, Paris Island Cause. If you want to keep it simple, just go with a mix, Gourmet Baby Greens, Rouge d'Hiver. This one is a nice red lettuce. I liked this one a lot this past spring, so I'm going to plant it again this fall. Then I've got the Ice Queen. This is sort of a nice classic one. It does really well even in warmer temperatures, which I'm sort of in still here in September. But talking about planting lettuce, there's so many different ways to do it. So I'm going to go over 2 for you that might spark some inspiration for your garden. The first would be if you are a family who likes to eat lettuce consistently and you want to make sure that you have something coming all the time. This is a 4-week process of planting that will guarantee you having lettuce no matter what every single week. So think about the amount of lettuce you want per week. Let's say you want 4 heads a week, you love eating salads, and that's your need. Well, what you want to do is plant at least 4 lettuce on the first week. So, 1, 2, 3, 4. Next week, plant another 4. Next week, plant another 4. And on the 4th week, plant another 4. By that 4th week, sometimes maybe the 5th, you will have the first batch ready to go. Harvest that for the week, wash it up, chop it in the fridge, and then replant. This is classic succession sowing. So one way to think about it is to divide a bed like this into 4ths and plant the lettuce that you want in a quadrant, and then go in a clockwise or counterclockwise fashion, planting out different varieties. You can make this even more fun by having different varieties in each week. So let's say I wanted 4 lettuce. I'm gonna do a red, a baby greens, a Paris Island Cause, and then this Ice Queen. So I have a variety of lettuce all coming to harvest at the same time, and then I could keep mixing that up. Another way to do it, if that seems a little bit complex for you or you just don't want to do it that way, is to draw furrows like this out and then sprinkle lettuce, much like I showed you how to do with the carrots earlier, and you can harvest them all as baby greens. You don't have to thin them out too much, but when they get to about this size, just rip them all out of the ground and eat them like that, or cut them a couple inches above the ground and they'll regrow again and you can use that probably 2 or 3 cuts before you have to actually rip that out and do a full replant. This is actually what a lot of market farmers will do. They'll take a drill with like a little saw and it kind of cuts the surface, and they'll do that over the course of a whole bed. Nothing stopping you from doing that in your home garden as well. So there's so much you can still grow in September. So even if you're a little bit burnt out from the garden, which I've definitely gone through, come back to it. Find some inspiration this fall to get something in the ground. More guides right here. Any of the seeds you saw in this video, you can shop at our seed company, Botanical Interests, either online or at 4,000 or 5,000 stores around the country. Good luck in the garden and keep on growing.